It all started with a letter. At first glance, it looked harmless, official letterhead, polite language, a gentle reminder about a neighborhood rule. But inside that envelope was the first crack in the foundation of a family's dream. Mark Sullivan had no idea that by moving into what seemed like the perfect neighborhood, he was stepping into a war zone. A war fought not with guns, but with rules, fines, intimidation, and power plays. Behind every manicured lawn and freshly painted fence lurked something darker. An HOA president who believed she was untouchable. A woman who ruled not with fairness, but with fear. And soon, the Sullivans would learn just how far she was willing to go to keep control. When Mark and Lavra Sullivan first drove into Brook Hollow Estates, they felt as if they'd finally stumbled into the life they had always dreamed of. The streets curved gently through a forest of towering oaks and freshly planted magnolias. Lawns stretched like green carpets in front of immaculate homes, and children rode their bikes in groups, laughing under the late afternoon sun. After years of cramped apartments and noisy city living, this was their dream come true: peace, safety, and the kind of stability they thought they'd never achieve. Mark, in his early 40s, worked as a project manager for a construction company. His job kept him busy, but he was dependable and steady, the kind of man who liked to see the results of hard work. Lavra, a schoolteacher, was equally steady, equally devoted to building a quiet and meaningful life for their two children, Emma and Jacob. At 12 and 9, they were at the perfect age to enjoy the freedom of a neighborhood like this. To the Sullivans, Brook Hollow Estates felt like a promise of everything they had earned. At first, the neighborhood seemed perfect. Neighbors waved as they carried groceries in. A couple next door stopped by with cookies. Even the welcome packet from the Homeowners Association felt comforting, a printed booklet of rules, a list of scheduled events, and reminders about lawn care and trash collection. It all felt designed to maintain harmony, to protect the beauty of this community they had worked so hard to join. But as Mark flipped through the packet, his eyes lingered on the name at the top. Evelyn Sharp, HOA President. The introduction described her as a dedicated community leader, someone who had served on the board for years, tirelessly working to preserve the neighborhood's beauty and safety. The picture next to her name showed a woman in her late 50s, her bob hair cut sharp, her suit pressed, her smile polished but hard. Mark didn't think much of it at the time. People like her were necessary. He thought, someone to enforce the rules, to make sure everyone played their part. He had no idea just how much power that title gave her, or how far she would go to keep it. The first weeks in Brook Hollow were bliss. The kids played outside until the fireflies came out. Lavra planted flowers along the front walk, arranging them in neat, colorful rows. Mark enjoyed the little tasks of homeownership, trimming hedges, painting the mailbox, and mowing the lawn early on Saturday mornings. Every evening they would sit on the porch with glasses of iced tea, watching the sun sink behind the oaks. Certain they had finally found the life they deserved, but even in paradise, shadows linger. There were moments, small, fleeting things, that hinted not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Mark remembered once watching Evelyn Sharp walk down the street. She didn't smile at the children, didn't wave at the neighbors. Instead, she scrutinized lawns, fences, and gutters, her sharp eyes cataloging every imperfection. Another time, Mark overheard two neighbors whispering near the mailbox, their voices hushed, glancing nervously toward Evelyn's house before, quickly changing the subject as she appeared. Still, these were easy to dismiss. Every neighborhood had its quirks, every leader their flaws. Mark and Lavra told themselves it was nothing. They focused on the good, the barbecues, the laughter, the clean streets. They had no reason to believe that the woman at the top of their HOA was about to turn their dream into a nightmare. Then came the letter. The letter was crisp, typed in bold letters, signed neatly at the bottom by none other than Evelyn Sharp. At first glance, it seemed simple, a friendly reminder that the Sullivan mailbox had not been painted to the neighborhood's approved shade of Brook Hollow white. The fine was small, only $50, and Mark shrugged it off. He bought a can of paint, spent an evening fixing the issue, and thought that would be the end of it. But days later, another letter appeared. This time it was the lawn. The notice claimed the grass was half an inch higher than regulation. A $100 fine was attached. Mark stood in his yard, ruler in hand, bewildered. His lawn was immaculate. He mowed it twice a week, edging it clean. Still, Evelyn's standards were impossible, and the fines kept coming. At first, Mark tried to laugh it off. "It's just paperwork," he told Lavra. "They're just being picky." But Laura's face showed the worry he tried to hide. "It's not normal, Mark. Why us?" The answer came slowly, through whispers in the neighborhood. Other families had received letters too, but not at the same intensity. A neighbor down the street confided one evening that Evelyn seemed to have favorites. Those who stayed on her good side never seemed to get fined. Those who spoke up, who dared to question her authority, suddenly found themselves buried under citations, fees, and threats. For the first time, the perfect neighborhood felt hostile. Every walk to the mailbox carried dread. Every envelope with the HOA seal sent Laura's heart racing. The fines escalated, trash bins left out too long, curtains that weren't the approved color, a basketball hoop that disrupted community aesthetics. Soon the Sullivans owed over $1,000 in fines. Mark tried to fight back. He attended a board meeting determined to defend his family. He walked into the community center expecting reason, fairness, maybe even compromise. Instead, he walked into a courtroom without justice. Evelyn sat at the center of the table like a judge, her board members flanking her like loyal soldiers. Every word Mark spoke was cut short, dismissed, twisted against him. When he presented photos of his lawn immaculate and green, Evelyn smirked. "Photos can be misleading," she said coolly. The board nodded, jotting notes like clerks in a trial. That night, Mark returned home humiliated, Lavra waiting anxiously at the kitchen table. They didn't even listen," he said bitterly. "It's like the whole board works for her." But the worst was yet to come. One morning, Emma and Jacob came running inside, shaken and pale. "Mom, Dad, there was a man in the yard." They cried. Mark rushed out, and sure enough, a contractor's truck sat parked at the curb. Two men in uniforms were measuring the fence line. Evelyn, clipboard in hand, stood nearby, instructing them. "What is this?" Mark demanded, striding toward her. Evelyn didn't flinch. "Your fence is 3 inches higher than permitted by Brook Hollow regulations. It will need to be replaced." Mark's voice rose. "This is my property. You can't just send workers here without permission." Her smile was cold. "You agreed to the bylaws when you moved here. Non-compliance carries severe consequences." The workers packed up under Mark's furious protests, but the damage was done. The Sullivans felt violated. Their home, supposed to be their safe haven, was now under siege. From that day forward, the harassment escalated. Neighbors who once waved now avoided eye contact, terrified of drawing Evelyn's wrath by associating with the troublemakers. At school, Emma overheard classmates whispering about her parents, repeating gossip Evelyn had planted about them being rule breakers and bad for the neighborhood. The isolation cut deeper than the fines. It wasn't just money Evelyn was after, it was control. She wanted obedience. Total, unquestioned obedience. And the Sullivans were resisting. Then came the threat that turned everything from harassment into war. One evening, as Mark sifted through bills at the kitchen counter, Lavra unfolded yet another letter. Her hands shook as she read aloud. Final. Warning. Continued noncompliance may result in legal action and property seizure. Mark froze. Property seizure. The home they had poured their savings into, the place their children slept, the dream they thought they had built. Evelyn was threatening to take it all away. For the first time, fear settled like a shadow in there. Home, Lavra cried quietly that night, whispering, "What if she can? What if she really takes our house?" Mark stared into the darkness, rage boiling in his chest. He had worked too hard, fought too long, to let someone like Evelyn destroy his family's life. But how do you fight someone who has twisted the system into a weapon? Each day after, the tension mounted. Evelyn prowled the streets like a hawk, always watching, always waiting for the smallest infraction to pounce on. Fines stacked higher, letters grew more threatening, and whispers of foreclosure began circulating. Like vultures overhead, the Sullivans were running out of time, and just when they thought it couldn't get worse, Evelyn made her boldest move. Yet the threats of foreclosure weighed on the Sullivan family like a dark cloud. Each letter from the HOA arrived like a strike of thunder, louder, closer, impossible to ignore. Mark began saving every scrap of paper, every photograph of their lawn, and every receipt from their attempts to comply with Evelyn's ever-changing demands. He built a folder, an arsenal of evidence. But deep down, he feared it wouldn't matter. Evelyn's grip on the board and on the neighborhood was too strong. Then, one morning, a letter arrived, not with a fine, but with an official seal. It wasn't from Evelyn's desk. It was from the county courthouse. The HOA was suing the Sullivans for repeated non-compliance and damage to community property values. Attached was the notice: their home could be seized and sold at auction if they lost. Lavra sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in her hands. Emma and Jacob hovered in the doorway, sensing the fear in their parents' voices. "They can't really do this, can they?" she whispered. Mark clenched his fists. "They think they can, but this time we fight." The weeks that followed turned their lives into a blur of court filings, late-night meetings with an attorney, and whispered prayers in the dark. Mark's lawyer warned him that HOA cases were notoriously difficult. "These boards," he said gravely, "they build their power on technicalities. If the judge believes even a fraction of their claims, you could lose everything." But Mark refused to back down. For every photo Evelyn submitted of supposed violations, he had counterphotos showing compliance. For every false accusation. He had statements from the few neighbors brave enough to speak up, though most were too terrified to get involved. When the trial date came, the Sullivans walked into the courthouse as though they were entering a battlefield. Evelyn was already there, immaculately dressed, exuding confidence. Her board members flanked her, whispering among themselves with smug smiles. She didn't just look certain of victory, she looked like she already owned it. The hearing began. Evelyn's attorney presented the case with ruthless precision. The Sullivans were serial violators, their lawn a disgrace, their fence an eyesore, their very presence a blight on the neighborhood. As the evidence mounted, the atmosphere thickened with tension. The Sullivans exchanged uneasy glances, their defensiveness palpable, knowing that their reputation and perhaps their home hung in the balance. As the evidence mounted, the atmosphere thickened with tension. The Sullivans exchanged uneasy glances, their defensiveness palpable, knowing that their reputation and perhaps their home hung in the balance. Each violation was read aloud, each fine displayed, each accusation polished to sound damning and undeniable. When Mark's turn came, he rose slowly, holding the folder of evidence that had consumed his life for months. His hands trembled as he spread the photos across the judge's bench: gleaming green grass, a fence measured within regulations, spotless driveways, and approved colors on mailboxes and shutters. Piece by piece he dismantled Evelyn's lies. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted as the truth began to surface, the tension palpable. Faces in the audience turned from skepticism to intrigue, and even Evelyn's smug expression faltered, revealing the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. With each photograph presented, whispers rippled through the crowd, a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she absorbed the evidence, while the weight of the moment pressed heavily on Evelyn, who now seemed acutely aware of the precariousness of her position. But Evelyn was prepared. She leaned forward, her voice smooth as silk. "With all due respect, Your Honor, photographs can be manipulated. What cannot be denied are the repeated complaints from community members. The Sullivans have consistently disrupted harmony in Brook Hollow. They'd been warned time and again, yet they refused to comply." The judge frowned, flipping through the files. Evelyn's confidence grew. She had played this game before. Most families folded under the pressure, too broke or broken to fight. The Sullivans, she assumed, would be no different. But then Mark's attorney rose with a thin smile. "Your Honor, the defense would like to submit Exhibit D." The room shifted. Evelyn's smirk faltered. Exhibit D was not just paperwork. It was a collection of emails leaked from inside the HOA board itself. Anonymous, yes, but damning beyond repair. The judge scanned them aloud. If they keep resisting, we'll bury them in fines until they give up. Remember, Evelyn wants them out by summer. Do whatever it takes. Target their kids too. Make the neighbors talk so they'll crack under pressure. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn's face flushed red, her hand gripping the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. "This is outrageous," she snapped. These messages could be fabricated, but the damage was done. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Sharp, these are very serious allegations. If true, they suggest deliberate abuse of power and harassment." For the first time, Evelyn looked unsettled, her perfect mask cracked. Mark seized the moment, his voice shaking with emotion. "Your Honor, this is not just about fines. This is about a family being terrorized in their own home. My children are afraid to play outside. My wife cries herself to sleep, wondering if we'll lose everything. This isn't community leadership, it's a campaign of control." Silence filled the courtroom. The judge leaned back, considering. The case was no longer about lawns or fences. It was about power, abuse, and justice. Finally, the judge's gavel struck once. "This matter requires further investigation. Until then, all foreclosure proceedings are frozen." The words hit Evelyn like a thunderclap. Her heart raced. As hope flickered to life, a fragile flame amidst the darkness of despair. With a renewed sense of determination, she turned to her husband, knowing that their fight was far from over and that they had a chance to reclaim their lives. For the first time, she wasn't in control. The Sullivans walked out of the courtroom. Not victorious, but alive to fight another day. Neighbors who had once looked away now whispered differently, some emboldened, others terrified. Evelyn's empire had cracks and everyone could see them, but as Mark stepped into the sunlight, holding Laura's trembling hand, he knew one thing for certain. Evelyn wasn't done. Not yet, she would come back. And when she did, she would come. With fury, the days after the court hearing felt like a strange kind of calm for the Sullivan family. The foreclosure threat had been frozen, the fines halted, and the HOA suddenly quieter than ever before. For the first time in months, Mark sat on his porch without clutching a folder of evidence, without glancing over his shoulder at Evelyn's house across the street, but beneath the calm, something darker lingered. Evelyn was not the kind of woman who accepted defeat easily. And although the judge had paused her plans, she still ruled the neighborhood like a queen who had only been temporarily inconvenienced. Her smile at board meetings was thinner now, her tone sharper, and her eyes colder. The neighbors noticed. Some whispered their relief that the Sullivans had stood their ground. Others stayed silent, afraid of what Evelyn might do if they showed support too openly. The air in Brook Hollow was heavy with tension, like a storm that had not yet broken, for the Sullivans was still far from normal. Emma still flinched when she saw Evelyn's car drive by. Jacob still asked at bedtime if they would have to move. Lavra tried to be strong, but the stress had carved deep lines in her face, and some nights, the sound of Evelyn's voice in her dreams still jolted her awake. Mark knew the fight wasn't over. And then, one evening, his phone buzzed with an anonymous text message, no name, no number he recognized. Just 4 words that made his blood run cold. "Check your mailbox. Tonight." Mark's hands trembled as he walked down the driveway, the night air thick around him. He opened the metal door of the mailbox and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were documents, HOA financial records, board communications, and receipts. But these weren't like the glossy violation notices Evelyn loved to send. These were raw, unfiltered. And incriminating, the documents revealed years of financial abuse, misuse HO funds, payments routed to companies connected to Evelyn's relatives, and inflated invoices for landscaping that had never been completed. Evelyn hadn't just been terrorizing families, she had been stealing from the entire community. Mark felt his heart race. This was bigger than he had ever imagined. Evelyn wasn't just a bully with a clipboard. She was a criminal hiding behind rules and regulations. The next morning, Mark met quietly with his attorney, sliding the envelope across the desk. The lawyer's eyes widened as he read. If this is real, he murmured, then Evelyn isn't facing a civil case anymore. She's facing prison. News travels fast in small communities. Within weeks, whispers spread that state investigators had opened a probe into Brook Hollow's HOA finances. Evelyn's confident stride at board meetings faltered. The woman who once silenced rooms with a glance now snapped at questions avoided. Eye contact and skipped meetings altogether. And then, one cold November morning, it happened. Police cars rolled into Brook Hollow, their flashing lights painting the perfect lawns red and blue. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as uniformed officers walked up Evelyn's front porch. Moments later, they led her out in handcuffs. The Queen of Brook Hollow, the woman who had ruled with an iron fist and a smug smile, was marched into the back of a squad car. The neighborhood buzzed with disbelief. Some cheered quietly behind closed doors. Others looked away, ashamed they had once supported her. But all of them felt it. The reign of Evelyn Sharp was over. For the Sullivans, it was a moment of quiet triumph. Emma cried tears of relief. Jacob asked if this meant they could finally have friends over without getting in trouble. Lavra hugged Mark tightly on the porch, her tears soaking into his shirt. For the first time in what felt like forever, they could breathe. In the months that followed, Brook Hollow changed. The HOA board was restructured under court order, with new members elected from volunteers in the neighborhood. Rules were rewritten, fines reduced, and transparency became mandatory. Families, who had once lived in fear, now planted gardens, painted fences, and hosted barbecues without the shadow of Evelyn looming over them, but scars remained. Some neighbors still whispered about the nights they felt spied on. The warnings slipped under doors, and the threats made in hushed tones. For the Sullivans, the memories of those long, fearful months lingered. Mark often sat on his porch at sunset, staring at the street where it had all begun. The manicured lawns looked the same, the houses stood unchanged, but the air felt lighter now. He thought of the neighbors who had stayed silent, too afraid to speak up. He thought of the children who had learnt too young what fear and power abuse looked like, and sometimes he thought of Evelyn sitting in a cell. Her empire crumbled, the queen without a kingdom. One evening, Emma joined him on the porch. She was older now, wiser in ways no child should have to be. "Dad," she asked quietly, "why did she hate us so much?" Mark sighed, staring at the horizon. "Some people don't hate you because of what you've done. They hate you because they can't control you. And when they can't control you, they try to destroy you." Emma thought about that for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The lesson lingered. For the Sullivans, the battle with the HOA had been more than a fight for their home. It had been a fight for their dignity, their safety, and their right to live without fear. They had learnt the true cost of silence, the strength it took to resist, and the way truth, when fought for relentlessly, could finally shatter even the strongest lies. And as the neighborhood healed, one truth became undeniable. Power can corrupt, fear can silence. But courage can change everything. So when you hear about HOAs, about neighborhoods torn apart by petty rules and abusive leaders, ask yourself, if it were your family, your home, your peace on the line, would you have the courage to fight back?
This was just one story, but the next one will be even more dramatic. Are you ready? Then you need to subscribe to HOA Stories 87 right now. Like this video, share it with your friends, and hit the bell because the next story might sound a little too close to home.